Hello everyone, I'm Corey and we're talking Manpower. Today I'm with Mr. Paul Hilton. He's the Deputy G8 here at the United States Army Training and Doctrine Command. Mr. Hilton, thank you very much for being here today. I appreciate it.
Happy to do it, Corey.
So please tell us about your role here at TRADOC.
Well, it's fairly typical for a deputy. The easiest definition is cover those things for the boss that she doesn't have time to get to. But typically what I try and do is ensure that the G8 staff has good solid interactions with the rest of coordinating and the special staff elements. So I try and ensure that I stay abreast of everything going on, especially with the G3. I cover things like G3 sync meeting, bring those ideas and initiatives back and make sure our directors are aware of the other things going on in the staff, which will eventually impact G8. And of course, since G8 provides the resources to do everything, at some level, almost everything going on in the command gets touched by G8.
So you're a former military, from my understanding. How long did you serve in uniform?
Just shy of 30 years.
And were you an FA50 officer?
I was. At the last part of my career, I served as an FA50 officer in the Pentagon.
And what type of experience was that like?
It was actually great. It was very different than anything I'd ever done in the Army before. And so I showed up as an infantry officer on an 01 Alpha assignment. 01 Alpha, any breathing officer will do. And got into FA50 just because that's where I ended up. But it was a real eye-opener to me. I'd always questioned, wow, how did this Jeep on my MTOW suddenly turn into a Humvee? But you never really understand. Generally, the truth is that when you're in the operating force, you don't really know how the Army runs, and you just sort of accept it. And so to get in on the ground floor of Total Army Analysis, TAA, and get a chance to see how that runs was really a terrific opportunity for me in terms of really expanding my understanding of what really makes the Army go.
So how was your transition from military to civilian life?
It was really fairly simple, and partly because of, I'd gotten into this kind of small, I won't go all the way to arcane, but small field, and so there were a lot of opportunities. If I wanted to keep doing the same thing, I interviewed with a good number of commercial firms who were interested in the skills I'd been able to develop in the Army. But at the end of the day, I decided to stay inside the Army as Department of the Army civilian. But it was really a very easy transition for me.
So I understand that you moved from the CP26 world to the CP11 world, as kind of the proponents would say, kind of crossed the dark side there. So how really different is the work between CP11 and CP26?
Corey, that's a really good question. And so at the analyst level, there can be a fair amount of difference between what an accountant does and what someone doing a manpower survey does. But I see the two as very closely intertwined. And interestingly, I've been in several sessions with Honorable Spear over the last year or two where I think it's, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think he sees the same thing. There's a fair interrelationship or correlation between manpower and the rest of resource management. I mean, the G8's title is resource management, and manpower is, in TRADOC anyway, inside the G8. Within TRADOC, it's our most important resource. We produce trained soldiers for the Army. We produce the future vision for the Army. And all that is really manpower intensive. It's essentially a manpower enterprise. So there's a really strong correlation. Over 51% of the Army's budget goes to manpower. And so again, in my view, the fields are really closely related. And so I really see my manpower background has provided me a lot of good insights again into the larger Army processes. And even if you look within manpower, so when I was the chief of manpower here, I had a section that built the manpower schedule 8, which correlates to the dollar schedule 8 for POM submission. And so from a programming aspect, really manpower and the POM process are absolutely tied at the hip.
So does your previous experience in uniform as an FA50 and as a CP26 careerist, how has it helped you your decision making? How does it help that?
I'm not sure it helps, Corey, in decision making as much as understanding. And again, having had the opportunity to run the TAA process for the Army, it allows me some insights sometimes into the why and how decisions might be being made, or what the Army's trying to shape. And so I won't say be a step ahead, but it allows me to very quickly understand, the 2 or 3 or 4 different directions things might head. And I think that allows me to provide our directors some pretty good advice and insights into where they ought to focus their efforts, and what any particular initiative might mean to TRADOC at the end of the day. This command is one of the Army's 3 ACOMs, but much of what we do, not the futures part, but the training part of Training and Doctrine Command is very much driven not by what we want to train, but by those decisions made in the Army and for a like total Army analysis, which drives, at the end of the day, that's what drives the number of signal battalions in the Army, and the number of signal battalions in the Army ultimately drives what we recruit in Recruiting Command, a part of TRADOC, and then what we train at the Signal School or any of our other schools.
So, what are some unique benefits and some unique challenges of doing resource management here at TRADOC?
One of them, to segue sort of, is just that our load is driven by outside forces, and to the extent the Army doesn't get those processes right, the SMDR is the major one, which drives our load, done 2 years out, the Structure Manning Decision Review. And if you ever figure out what that means, let me know. But that process, which determines what we're going to train 2 years out, every time it's wrong or less than correct, it leads to things called traps and training resource arbitration panels. And what that does is change our load, either in the budget year and fairly often in the year of execution. And so that is a challenge for a resource manager, because there's no way my Manpower shop can change the TDA 4 months out, and even if they did, it wouldn't affect anything. You're not going to get any soldiers assigned. When you find out in March that you're going to train more engineer soldiers than the Army forecasted 2 years ago, there are no more engineer soldiers to send here. Everyone who's moving in the summer already has orders. And so typically we end up doing a contract for that. We've tried to help ourselves as much as we can. We've gone to what we call indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity, IDIQ contract vehicles, which are structured with CLINs that allow us to task order against them, which makes the contract much more responsive to the needs of commanders in the field. But that's certainly one of the challenges, is that our training load is driven outside our control. And then, frankly, on the other end of it, U.S. Army Recruiting Command success at getting the numbers that DA laid out in the total Army analysis process, getting those at the MOS level of detail can also be a struggle sometimes, which again will lead to, oftentimes in the summer, what we call our summer surge period, changes in what the load shows up on the doorstep as opposed to what is forecasted to be 2 years ahead.
So how do you engage with the CP26 community here?
We have very active engagement with the 26 community here. First off, our Manpower shop here in TRADOC is certainly very much a full spectrum Manpower shop. So we do pretty much the full spectrum of Manpower work here. We do everything from classic building TDAs. I mentioned already we build Schedules 8. We're very actively involved in total Army analysis on the generating force side. We do models and we do studies. And so we do the whole gamut of Manpower functions. And again, because of the way this command is structured and because of the outputs of this command are very much Manpower dependent, it's a very active cross-involvement between my Manpower and my budget shop for issues that are, everyday issues, and then again, Manpower and the total and the POM process with my PA&E shop, and it's really surprising the broad range of things from, again, I mentioned traps. How do we sort that out? The manpower folks figure out what's the bill going to be to train that load. And then the budget folks have to figure out, okay, how are we going to pay for that? To programmatic issues, there's one going on now the chief has asked us to look at increasing the length of basic combat training by a week and some select AITs by a week, and then all the OSIT courses by 2 weeks. Well, that requires some fairly in-depth analysis from both the Manpower team and PAE team, and of course the TRADOC G357 TOMA team. And so that kind of interaction goes on every day here. The Manpower shop is integrally related to practically every function we do here in the TRADOC G8.
So why do you think it's important for CP26 interns to rotate here at TRADOC, and what perspective do they get?
I think it's a great opportunity to come here. Again, as I already mentioned, we do pretty much all of the CP26 functions here. And the other thing that they will learn here is how different this command is. The generating force by definition is made up of a bunch of more or less unique commands. None any more important than the other. What the Corps of Engineers does and what ATEC do are equally important, but what TRADOC does is quite different than what most of the rest of the Army does, and it's foundational. It's the very definition of foundational. This is where we recruit the soldiers who become the Army, and we train them how to be soldiers, and then we bring them back later in their career to continue their professional development. And so having insight into how that works, I think would benefit a career civil servant for the rest of their career, just having an understanding of how this command works and how we produce those outputs which eventually build the Army.
Well, Mr. Hilton, that's all I have. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, thanks very much, Corey. I appreciate the opportunity.
I really appreciate being here. I know you're super busy, so thank you very much.
Thanks again.
Well, everyone, that's all we have time for today. We look forward to our next segment, and thank you very much for listening. And until next time, have a great Army Day.